the national anthem. Can I ask that everyone now refrain from talking and observe 2 minutes of silent prayer and reflection with regard to our country's future. We welcome the presidents and we ask them to remain standing while we will sing the national anthem.
Nkosi sikeleli Afrika maluphakanyisu phondo lwayo Israel Imithandazo yethu Nkosi sikelela thina lusapho lwayo murena buluka sitshaba sa Yesu ufedise dintwa le matshwenye usibuluke sitshaba sa Yesu sitshaba sa South Africa, South Africa. Eighty blow van onze hemel, eighty diepte van onze. Orat wevige gebergte, waar die kranse antwoord geeft. Sound and call to come together, and united we shall stand. Let us live and strive for freedom in South Africa, our land.
Thank you. You can be seated. It gives me great pleasure to call to the stage Ms. Nonhle of the Luthuli Foundation, but also chairman of the reference group of the National Dialogue Foundation Initiative. Nonhle.
Good morning. I welcome you all on behalf of the National Foundation's Dialogue Initiative. I hope that you've arrived this morning in good humor and light spirits, despite the weighty topic of the day's agenda. My name is Nomhle Gabashe Nomhle Gabashe Kankla. You'll find that throughout the day, I will be asking for your indulgence on quite a number of things. And this is the first of many requests. I'm feeling a bit nostalgic. And I've wanted the opportunity to say this again. So I'm going to welcome you in a different sort of way. I'm going to welcome you with good morning, good morning, good morning, everybody. Because I haven't heard that in so long. I'm missing one of our morning talk show hosts who used to welcome us all that way. This is the first dialogue of the National Foundation's Dialogue Initiative. The name says it all. We want to operate on a national basis. We are a coalition of foundations, and we are driving a dialogue initiative. I would like to acknowledge our hosts, which are all the foundations that are part of the NFDI. That is the Chief Albert Luthuli Foundation, the Helen Suzman Foundation, the Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe Trust, the Desmond and Leah Tutu Legacy Foundation, the FW De Klerk Foundation, the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, the Mlambo Foundation, and the Jakes Gerwel Foundation. I'd also like to have a special welcome and acknowledgement for the 3 honorable presidents that we have before us today. Former President De Klerk, former President Mbeki, and former President Motlanthe. I think that I speak for the nation, and certainly the people that are present in this room, when we say that we are humbled by the presence of all 3 of you at this one auspicious occasion. I think that it's also important for us to recognize where we are at this moment in time. And maybe that's why we have the 3 presidents who could come to, former presidents who could come together now. This is a special moment in South Africa's history. Actually, it's a moment that none of us in 1994 thought we would ever have to experience or require. And special moments are actually a matter of 2 components. One is about timing, and the other one is a sense of presence or awareness. In terms of timing, I don't think that there's any question about the fact that some unforeseeable and unexpected things have taken place in the history of our democracy. And at some point, these undesirable events eventually culminate to a moment in time when citizens of this nation have to stand up and say, no more. Not in the name of our Constitution, not in the name of our democracy, and certainly not in our name as citizens of this country. These are the matters that got the 8 foundations that are part of the NFDI 2 years ago to start talking to each other, which makes the subject of timing rather interesting. I've heard a number of people say this past week that the timing of this particular dialogue was placed perfectly. I can't say that the NFDI can take credit for that, because we've been talking to each other and planning an event of this nature for 2 years. But for whatever reason, call it spiritual, call it cosmic, the stars have aligned and have brought us to this particular moment in time, and for that, we are grateful to God that we are able to find each other in this particular manner. The program for today, which will be shown on the screen, is actually very straightforward. The purpose of the dialogue is not for members of the foundation alone to talk to you or for us to talk to each other, but it's actually to have an interaction between the foundations and the people that have been invited to be a part of this auspicious occasion. And what should be understood by the presence of the presidents, the former presidents, is that we have been guided to this point in time by the history that has been laid in front of us by these 3 former presidents. And it must be an awful troubling thing for them, given the effort and the sacrifice that they have made, their sacrifice amongst the sacrifices of many citizens of this country, both with us today and already past. It must be a very troubling thing for them to find us in our democratic development at such a retarded state. Let me repeat that. It must be a challenge after 23 years of democracy to find South Africa at such a retarded state. What we know about making a democracy work is that, yes, we must have very strong judicial institutions. Yes, we must have very active and informed parliamentary structures. Yes, we must have very, very well-equipped structures of government culminating in the office of the presidency. But what we also need is a level of active citizenship. We need a level of educated literacy in the democratic process. And what the foundations discussed back in 2014 is that the role of the citizen in the protection of this democracy and in the protection of the Constitution has not grown and developed to the point that it should. In fact, all those areas of government are accountable and responsible to the citizen, and the citizen of this country needs to hold those three structures to account. We in the National Foundations Dialogue Initiative wanted to start a process of encouraging those citizens to become engaged with their democratic structures and to demand more from their government than they've currently received. We hope to hear more about that subject from the presidents this morning. I'd like to take care of a few administrative or housekeeping issues. We're going to be led by 4 facilitators this morning who will be leading various discussions and making introductions. One you've already met, Dr. Tiens Elof, seated at my far left there. Prof. Bani Pichani, sitting next to him. Also Jackie Surobe, who is part of the facilitations group. And then lastly, Nana Ngobesi, who will join them at the table shortly. Each of these people represent Dr. Elof, the De Klerk Foundation, Prof. Pichani, the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, Jackie Suroke, the Robert Sobukwe Foundation, and Nana Ngobesi, the Albert Luthuli Foundation. Also, by the way of housekeeping, I would ask that we each check our phones and ensure that it's on silent. I know we're very important people, but it will be disruptive to the proceedings if we don't place it on silent. The abolition facilities are through the far door to my right, and they're ladies and men's facilities on each side of the lift. I'm afraid that you will have to go through the security check again to come back in, so you will make a complete circle. And lastly, for those people, for those addicts amongst us who must get their nicotine fix, there are balconies to the end of this room beyond the coffee and teas that you received this morning where you can get your regular fix of nicotine. I see we don't have the program up, Collins. Most of you have already gone through registration. It will now be the job of Dr. Elof to introduce the presidents and begin our engagement with them. Thank you very much. Sorry, Jackie Surobe.
Thank you very much. It's Jackie Surobe. My job is very easy because I'm introducing to you heads of state that you already know. Without much ado, I'd like to call on President FW De Klerk to make a contribution.
Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, I regard our conference here today as one of the most important and hopeful developments in recent years. It is enormously significant that foundations that were established by former national leaders from across the political spectrum have come together today to discuss the future of our beloved country. And I'm honored to share the platform with my two former colleagues, President Mbeki and President Motlanthe. The timing could also not be more appropriate. South Africa is in the grip of the most serious challenges that have confronted it since the establishment of our non-racial constitutional democracy 23 years ago. Our economy is in a more parlous condition than at any time since 1994. We are experiencing an unprecedented constitutional crisis. We are also beset by serious social challenges. There is no doubt that we need a new national dialogue to discuss these pressing challenges. We need a dialogue that will include South Africans from across the political, ethnic, and economic spectrums of the nations, because a few things are certain. The future of all South Africans and of all our children for decades to come is being threatened by the current challenges. There will be no solutions if we do not achieve win-win outcomes for all South Africans, and particularly for the most disadvantaged 40% of our population. And our problems can be resolved only if we work together. We need to discuss our economy. Here, surprisingly enough, I agree with President Zuma that we need radical economic transformation. We need, ladies and gentlemen, to transform radically the situation where almost 40% of the population languishes in unemployment and hopeless poverty. We need to transform radically our approach to investment. Instead of frightening off local and foreign investors with undisguised attacks on property rights, we should be doing everything we can to persuade them to help us create jobs and to unlock South Africa's enormous economic potential. We need to transform our attitude towards the appointment of people to key positions in the state and parastatals. In the appointment and promotion of people, merit needs to be taken into account properly while moving forward as rapidly as possible to the representativity required by the Constitution. We need to transform radically our approach to endemic corruption that is draining our resources and inhibiting growth and investment. We need to re-establish effective corruption-busting units like the Scorpions. We need a national prosecuting authority that will prosecute those who break the law without fear, favor, or prejudice. We need to transform radically the current situation in which our labor relations are regarded as amongst the worst in the world. We must ensure a fairer balance between labor, management, and government, and work together to produce greater value for all. What we don't need is the type of racially divisive and economically catastrophic radical economic transformation that is being touted by Professor Chris Malikane, the advisor of our latest Minister of Finance. He wants to apply in South Africa the same policies that the Chavistas imposed in Venezuela and that have led not only to the collapse of Venezuela's economy, but also to the erosion of its democracy. And then we need to discuss the constitutional crisis in which we find ourselves. There is nothing wrong with our constitution. The problems that confront us do not arise from the structure or framework of the Constitution. It arises from our failure to observe its guiding values and to embrace its principles. The core problem is that our President is not carrying out his duties in terms of Section 83 of the Constitution. He is not upholding, defending, and respecting the letter and spirit of the Constitution as the supreme law of the Republic. And he is not promoting the unity of the nation and that which will advance the Republic. The President has undermined the independence of the Chapter 9 institutions and organs of government, including the intelligence services, the National Prosecuting Authority, and the Hawks. He has not ensured their impartiality or their duty to exercise their powers and perform their functions without fear, favor, or prejudice. And then there are persistent reports supported by the former public protector and the courts that state-owned enterprises are being routinely abused to promote the personal and financial interests of some leaders and their families and associations. All this has become known as state capture. However, ladies and gentlemen, as SABC Jonas recently pointed out, it goes further than state capture. It's a coup. As he put it, and I quote, "You have a country being stolen in front of our own eyes. We are facing a coup via the very capture of the state." Apart from the Chapter 9 institutions and government agencies, Parliament was supposed to provide another safeguard against abusive and unconstitutional executive action. However, it has failed to carry out its very oversight role, primarily because MPs are accountable to their political bosses and not to the electorate. Accordingly, I believe we need to discuss the implementation of the recommendations of the Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka Commission to ensure that MPs owe their first loyalty to the electorate and not to their political.
Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka. She's on international duty and could not be here with us, but we will use a method of communication from her side. She works for the United Nations organization, and I think we're all familiar with her wonderful work, both at Mlambo Foundation and in the past that she has done. She's a champion of the liberation of women, and young women in particular. And she's doing this wonderful work all over the country. Thank you.
Themselves to a higher standard, and they were beyond reproach. This made our struggle credible and our cause just. With Ubuntu again, our people helped to create a narrative that explained human solidarity to us as a nation. There are many around the world who have also embraced this term and appropriated it for themselves and for their struggles. Our tradition of Indaba, Lekgotlas, Bosberad, the way we handled CODESA and the Constituent Assembly, achieving sufficient consensus, all this makes us a people who dialogue. All three feed into a tremendous, positive, shared history that is defining for South Africa, and it is to be cherished. So where do we stand now? We are now in need of a leadership that can help us to restore the values that we have been losing. We need role models for this, and we need society at all levels to engage and to pull ourselves together. We need to return to the South Africa that is envisaged in our Constitution. We need leaders who serve instead of being served, and to restore Ubuntu to be part of the guiding principles for our nation. We are deeply in need of dialogue, where dissent is not seen as contentious. Youth and women have played an important and a positive role in our discourse. The women in our country and women in many parts of the world, including countries in conflict, are often a catalyst for change, able to stand for peace and reconciliation when nations tear themselves apart. Basadi, Batswara Tiba Gabuhali. In defense of the weak and the indigent, we fight for justice. We need to occupy that space again in our country, more decisively and deliberately. We must not hand over a divided, demoralized, unscrupulous country to the next generation, where there is mediocrity and greed. Instead, let us strive for excellent Ubuntu and Batupile. Who stands to lose most if we do not find our way? The masses of our people who are still battling poverty, and those who deserve and need services will lose. When we deliver those services, it is not a favor that we dispense, but a right that people must have. We must not expect to be thanked or rewarded, or even reward ourselves for doing our job, just as we cannot reward a fish for swimming. The women and girls who live and experience violence will lose when the institutions that are supposed to show zero tolerance to any form of violation of rights are themselves in crisis. The rights of women and those who have overcome many challenges are eroded when we fail to respect our Constitution and its values. When racism from all sides and xenophobia rears its ugly head, we all lose. That is why this is the time for dialogue. We need to restore decorum in Parliament. It is time for introspection and correctional action in the best interest of our society, for our hard-won freedom. From the current generation must not also lose out on the benefits of freedom, and the next generation must also cherish the freedom. We must dialogue towards a non-sexist, non-racist, democratic, and corruption-free South Africa. Thank you.
I'm acknowledging the presence of the former presidents and the prominent persons we have here and other foundations that are here. I'm just going to deal with the question and answer after I've made this short announcement. And there's a lady by the name Asanda Magaqa, to whom I'm going to be referring the other foundations. She's right there at the back. If you can look at her hand, there she is, Asanda. She's raising her hand. I'm actually raising her so that she's able to take the names of the other foundations that are not on the list, who have been given an opportunity to make short statements that will be read after the 8 foundations have made their presentations just after tea. But we are going to start with the question and answer session right now. But one thing that I would also like to acknowledge is the presence of the eminent persons we have amongst us, who also have an opportunity to just give a 1-minute statement, because this forum is about ordinary people who want to make their voice heard. So we are going to reduce the time because we are running a little bit out of time. We have Mr. Serote here, Ambassador Thandi Lutulikabashe, Sheila Sisulu, Silo Makeka Kancube, Nonkululeko Koboto, Mukoni Rachitanga, Molo Mzwandile, Mlapo Kobela, Menzimbatha, the Honorable Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi, Auditor General Kimi Thembekile Makwethu, sorry, Ki Itumetsi Gwangwa, sorry, Kgalema Rajab, Jonas Gwangwa, Joel Nachitenze, Yani Evans or Jenny Evans, Hassan Mohammed, Dr. Rampele, Aziz Pahad, Ambassador Thandi Rankwe, Lindiwe Mabuza, Ambassador Supamloi, Ambassador George Nene, and Ewe Adande. Amongst their foundations, we are aware that we have Save SA as one of the foundations that are here. And I'm so glad that Ms. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka mentioned the women. We have Sawid also represented here. They also have to make a short statement that will be read after the foundations. If there are any other foundations that are here, please go and see Asanda Makaka so she's able to put you on the program right after the other foundations have spoken. Now, I'm going to deal with the question and answer session. And it may sound very unfair, but the media will have their opportunity to talk to the former presidents around lunchtime. They have their time set aside. So we are going to open the platform. Mainly, the questions will be coming from other people other than the media that we actually have here. I think that will be fair. Shall I have a few questions? I'll start with probably 3 questions on my right, and then I'll deal with the other 3 questions on my left. I think we have a roving micro here. Are there any questions that come from people other than the ones who are in the media? I cannot see. There's a light that's coming straight to my face.
No, thanks very much. My name is Sunny Boy Similan.
If any.
I'm an activist. I came here as an activist. The question that I wanted to ask is informed by the book that I've just recently read by Dr. Kulumbata that says during the CODESA period, there was no focus on the economy or the economic transformation. I just wanted to ask the presidents that are there that
I see it.
come again? That what is that we miss out, or can they confirm that? And what is that needs to be done? Thanks. Bye.
Good morning to the panel and the dignitaries. I humble myself before you. I have a question for the whole of... my name is Naledi Mwabelo. Are we really and honestly living in a democratic country where everybody is equal regardless of your rank in society? Or is this democracy just a place where the underprivileged people dream and hope for? Thank you.
Okay. One more question, young man with a gray shirt. You.
Thank you very much. My name is Kenneth Mokhatla. I'm from the PIC. During the President FW De Klerk's speech, he talked about the race question, and he also pointed out about Professor Chris Malikan. But given our history, I want to ask him, what is his take about the wealth redistribution? Because he's only pointing out about the racial divisions, but he's not saying on how do black people get to benefit in the new dispensation. Thank you very much.
I think we'll come back to the podium here. We'll ask the... Yes, we'll come back to the podium here and throw the question to the floor. Shall we start with you, sir?
Well, let me say about the first question.
No, we've got
Is the
these things.
microphone working? Let me say about the first question. I think we did address the economy, although not in a very specific way in the constitutional negotiations. The property clause is an essential aspect of economic security for investors, and the property clause therefore has an economic basis. I think the clauses about allowing the concept of something like fair discrimination relates to the economic divides arising from the wrongs of apartheid, and that therefore there should be a form of affirmative action, although the words are not used in the Constitution, but the issue of fair discrimination, allow affirmative action and black economic empowerment in a balanced manner. That is what the Constitution prescribes. The issue of representativity in the civil service has an economic basis. So I disagree with the writer of the book to say we have neglected the economy in the constitutional negotiations, but maybe President Mbeki can bear me out on that. With regard to the specific question addressed to me, no, the wealth distribution is not in a good state. But how do you repair it? Not by just cutting the existing relatively small cake up in a different way. The best way to get a better wealth distribution is to bake a bigger cake. And to bake a bigger cake, you need investment. And to get investment, you need investor confidence. And to have investor confidence, you need to organize your economy on the basis that investors can be sure of profit, can be sure of security of their investment. And all that flies in the face of what the professor is advocating. As far as the young questioner is concerned, yes, we have a democracy, but it's not very healthy at the moment.
And he has asked for some of the other presidents to assist in answering questions.
Go on, Chief.
Well, you know, as a general point, the system of capitalism, and we live in that system in South Africa, is very good at wealth creation, but it is very, very poor in working out how that wealth should be equitably distributed. That's a fundamental flaw of this system of capitalism, that it can create enormous wealth, but the distribution side is always lagging far behind the wealth creation. And that's what gives rise to the fundamental contradiction in society. It leads to situations where, you know, the top 1% of society controls almost 90% of the wealth of the country. And that's what creates poverty, that's what creates social upheavals, because indeed those who are wallowing in wealth end up having to raise the walls, the perimeter walls around their properties to keep the poor out. But you know, the idea of democracy is that we should be able to create a far much more equitable system of distribution of wealth.
I think we can go on and take more questions, Mr. President. You can.
No. With regard to the CODESA negotiations, I think what, I'm sure Kulumbata would have raised this. The central point was to end the political system of apartheid and institute a democracy. is what is at the heart of the negotiations. And so the so that's what the negotiations were about. The matter about what are the practical steps to take to transform South Africa. Here's the Constitution, as President De Klerk has just said. Here's the Constitution which provides for all sorts of things, including addressing the legacy of the past. I'm saying as part of the process of ensuring that we end the political system of apartheid and bring into being a democratic system. It's the heart of the negotiations, quite what Kulumbata would expect about what happens in economic negotiations. I don't quite know. I'm not quite sure what that means, how you would do it. A government comes, elections take place in terms of the Constitution. Government comes into power. And it's for the government to say, this is what we propose should be done in order to change the Constitution for the better. But I think the point that has been made about the Constitution surely recognizes the fact that we needed to address this legacy that we're inheriting. Now, yes, indeed, we're a democratic society. But what the young lady was asking is perfectly correct. We still remain an unequal society. That's why for all of these years, we've always said a central task is the eradication of the legacy of colonialism and apartheid. Now, I want to come back to what we've met here to do. It was not to interview the three of us about all sorts of things. It was to begin the process of national dialogue. And it's exactly these questions that are being posed, which must become part of that discussion in the national dialogue. What is it that we need to do in order to end the inequality to which the young lady referred? The economy, as President Motlanthe has just said, a capitalist economy, has the features that he explained. How do we address this matter of ensuring that you deal with this issue about wide disparities, inequalities in terms of wealth and income? That must be part of the discussion in the national dialogue. And the question is not easy to resolve. I know there are all sorts of texts and books and articles that are written about this. But in the practice, I'm saying it's not easy to resolve. President De Klerk, for instance, raised this question about investment. One of the challenges we have here is that historically, for whatever the reason, we don't save enough. You can't invest, build a factory, build a road, do whatever, without capital. And so you must answer the question, where does this capital come from? Clearly, we are not generating sufficient capital in the country to be able to address our challenges. Even if you look at China, yeah, I'm about to finish. Look at China. Rapid development. The reason the Chinese said in the late 70s, let's have an open door policy, is because they were themselves not generating sufficient capital. So it attracted from the rest of the world. So I'm saying those are questions that must come up in the national dialogue. So rather than these questions being asked to us outside of this context, I think that's not correct.
Right. Before I continue, taking more questions. I need to add to the list of the prominent persons who can actually make a statement. I understand we have Mr. Jeff Khadebe here. We have Prof. Mahoba. We have Phumzile Mbeki. I needed to mention that she worked with us in Sawit, my favorite organization. But above that, the very Mr. Dr. Kulumbata that was actually mentioned in these questions is amongst us. Thank you so much. And continue to take some more questions this side. Yes, sir.
Madam Facilitator, my name is George Lindeque. I'm here from Johannesburg. I'd like to pose a question to the presidents, please, and then venture an answer, and I would like them to respond or comment if they do not mind. President Mbeki made the point that the rose is ill or sick. My question then is, how do we heal the rose? How do we get it healthy again? And my venture of an answer is, our presidents and the other leaders in the country created a constitution for us, a political settlement, but I believe we need other initiatives too. We need an initiative to create an emotional settlement amongst ourselves in all South Africans. Secondly, so that then once we have the emotional settlement, we can develop a social and economic settlement. Thank you, Madam Facilitator.
Thank you, Madam. I'm Henry Matthys from the Western Cape, affiliated to Freedom Park and also to the School for Public Leadership at the University of Stellenbosch. My question is also to the three of you. We are talking about a constitution that's just. Don't the three of you feel that you have omitted one of the very important groups of our people, the First Nations, and that both three of you are guilty of neglecting their rights as far as the land issue is concerned? That the economic development of that people should be of prime importance in dialogues like this. I sit in many conferences where we are discussing the future of our country, and every time I realize that the Khoi and the San people are not part of the future development ideas and concepts of our nation. Don't you think that all three of you, whilst you were Deputy President, Mr. De Klerk, Mr. Motlanthe, and Mr. Mbeki, you people did not give the rightful recognition to that people? And how can we build a just South Africa if you don't allow them now to come to the table and be regarded as full citizens and be responding to their rights?
Good morning, dignitaries. My name is Naledi Marobela, and I'm from Midrand High School. My question is, how does the current leadership motivate the youth of today in order for us to build a future generation fulfilled with social development, economic growth, and non-racism? And how do you plan on involving more of the youth in these dialogues, as we are the future? Thank you.
I don't know how to answer questions.
Thank you
like
so
that.
much. I think we'll open the podium to the presidents
Let
for them
them
to
start
answer.
this time.
I've been asked to start from the right. Yes.
There's an issue raised about a moral something.
Emotional settlement.
Emotional settlement. I'm terribly sorry. I wouldn't know how to comment on that, because what is if our colleague could be more specific about it, it would be possible to respond to this emotional thing. But while we're waiting for that, the issue that's raised about the Khoi and the San, I want us to come back to the issue of why we have met here today. I agree entirely with you. If you were to say part of the national dialogue must be to address the challenges of addressing the interests of the Khoi and the San. let's not to talk about the history about what happened. Because I can tell you what the government did in terms, for instance, about land settlements for the Khoi people, which we did. I was there personally, and we handed over land to them, and so on. There are problems about that particular settlement because then other problems arose. But I think we should say, let this discussion about the Khoi and the San be part of the national dialogue. And I think that would be correct.
That's right.
The thing about bringing up of the youth and integration of the youth is very important. And again, I would like to say, I would hope that all of us, the foundations, would really go out of their way to make sure that the youth participate in the dialogue. Because I think it's in the course of their involvement in terms of determining the future of the country that you will have this development that the young lady was talking about. I think that's the central issue.
Indeed.
Then there was the emotional thing.
That's it.
Yeah. Like all soft things, Madam Facilitator, emotional is a very difficult issue. What I mean when I talk about emotional settlement is that we have healed the past. We have healed ourselves in respect of the past. That has not yet happened. My view is, and our view is, when I say our, Mampila and I, is that once we have that, we will be at peace with one another and we would have dealt with the past.
Thank you, sir. I think they got that. Anyone ready to venture into that?
I delegated to the President, Kgalema here.
Well, thank you very much. Professor Keurapeti Khositsile is a poet. And in one of his poems, he writes past, present, future as one word. And he says, past, present, future is always now. And so in dealing with problems that were occasioned by the past, we must always be mindful of the fact that we're addressing them in the here and now as a way of laying down a foundation for the future. So the three are always together. I remember that President Nelson Mandela established the moral regeneration movement, and he mandated it to deal with what he called the RDP of the soul, which I think is very close to what you are raising about, the healing as the Constitution enjoins us to address the disabilities of the past and also to heal the wounds created by our immediate past. Now, I want to come to the issue of the Khoi and the San and the Korana and the Griqua and the Nama people in South Africa in relation to the land. I happen to be part of a high-level panel established by the Speakers Forum, and we've done outreach programs throughout all provinces, and these communities came forward to raise their claim to land and so on. But they are not the only ones. Many other communities came forward to raise the question of the land. And as a panel, we are at a point where we think we would be able to come up with recommendations of how the land question should be addressed without creating any problems to anybody, but that as South Africans, it is possible for us to address that question once and for all, because many communities in rural areas were never ever issued with title deeds. They were given what is called permission to occupy certificates, which don't serve as a commercial instrument, which essentially means that they were excluded from participating in the mainstream economy because land is an asset. I think by end of August, the panel will be able to finalize its report and present it and make it public so that the recommendations, in my view, will be able to help the country to address the issue of land reform, land distribution and restitution, all of those questions.
Thank you, sir.
I know you're running out of time, so I acquiesce. I think the questions have been adequately dealt with by my two colleagues. I would just like to underline, in this dialogue, it's very important that we give a proper role and place and opportunity to the youth.
Thank you so much. I'll take another set of questions. Again, I would like to
Oops.
sorry.
Thank you, facilitator, and indeed honored to be able to ask the question. Just as an observation, as we sit here, I'm struck by how we, as a population, feel marginalized and disempowered to deal with the challenges that face us. And struck also by three past presidents who seem to feel that as well. And many, many leaders here who seem to really sense that frustration. We've got a crisis. The incredible phrase used earlier by President Motlanthe, something profoundly wrong, simmering in the annals of our time. And we're all marginalized. So the question is, does a dialogue initiative fix that? Is something maybe not more by the way of a strong activism needed? Does a dialogue initiative fix that? We seem to be, with the current leadership of our country, outmaneuvered every time. You know, those in power have an incredible ability to just outmaneuver those who are of goodwill. Those who are of evil will have outmaneuvered us. And does a dialogue initiative fix that disempowered problem? Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone present here today, our former state presidents and our VIPs, all protocol observed. My name is Pelang Mashaba. My question to our panel is, how do we get back to the values and principles endorsed in our Constitution in 1994? But also, I'd like to say that in terms of our current leadership, or rather the problems that we're facing today, is how do we define governance? For me, governance is an oversight process of effective and efficient governance for stakeholders, which the stakeholders are the citizens of this country. But we're sitting here today and we've been failed. We've been failed, and therefore people that will suffer the most are the children in Khayelitsha, in Gugulethu, in Alexandra, and so forth. So what do we say about the governance? Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mohau Busiu. I'm just an active citizen. President Motlanthe spoke about the capitalist class. And I think in 2006, President Mbeki, addressing the 4th annual Nelson Mandela lecture, he spoke about this development of the capitalist class in our society and how it has seamlessly embedded itself in our society and how we relate to one another. And at the heart of it is about the personal accumulation of wealth. And he had said, at whatever cost, it is about get rich, get rich, get rich. And I think it is the crisis in the leadership that we have today. But as he also spoke about the humane systems of society during his speech, I think what we should address also is about how we relate to one another. Things such as the role of the church in advancing the democratic project, and how the judicial service can also help us in this regard, and the role of the youth as well.
Thank you so
Thanks.
much. Before I ask them to answer the questions, I think I can be forgiven for focusing on the foundations, for giving an opportunity to write the statements. Other organizations that are here who would like to make the short statements are actually given the same opportunity to do the same. My apologies about that. Shall we ask the eminent persons to answer the questions?
Well, can I, in reaction to the first question, say there's room for activism next to dialogue. We're not saying dialogue should replace activism, but this dialogue has as its grand aim, in my heart and mind, to build an ever-growing consensus about what is the right way forward for South Africa. This dialogue is about post-President Zuma. It's about post some of the burning pragmatic issues of the day. It is about building a consensus as we did 23 years ago about our Constitution and our constitutional future. It is about how do we find a way within the framework of the Constitution. How do we find a way to bring greater equality, to close that gap, to address the needs and the problems of that 40%? How do we more effectively fight corruption and all the things I've listed in my speech? So it's a grand, broad-based dialogue that we are trying to promote on this launching day here today. But there's room next to it for activism, there's room next to it for organizations to march, to protest, to do whatever they want to do. But there needs to come greater cohesion in the public discussion which we are having. And we hope that through this dialogue, that greater cohesion can be achieved.
Thank you.
Would you like to react to the other questions?
Go on.
The issue of governance, I think it's important in the sense that we need stability, political stability, if we are to make progress in our efforts of building an economy that would take care of the basic needs of all South Africans. Now, for that to happen, you therefore need a capable and stable state. And I want to take just 2 seconds to explain this. The state as distinct from government, because governments come and go every 5 years. Theoretically speaking, you may end up with a different government. But the state must be stable and capable. And what that means is that we must then have a system of appointing the most talented people to man or staff the state. And so we must avoid this high turnover at senior management level in government departments. Because each time there's a change of personnel, institutional memory is lost there. And you lose important skills. And therefore you end up with a state which is not stable, but unstable, where the rest of junior managers or bureaucracy is unsure as to whether they will still have a job or not, simply because of this high turnover. So that's what we need. We need a stable state. In other countries, position of Director General is referred to as permanent secretary. And permanent precisely because they are meant to be there for a long time. We do have a good example in our government. The Department of Science and Technology has had where the same person serving as Director General, Dr. Phumzile for years. And several ministers have been coming and going from that department. But the department itself, as a state, is stable. So what I'm saying is, government is the face of the state for a term at a time. And unless we attend to this question, I think we will forever have, it's very difficult when you have the political head on a steep learning curve and the senior managers on a steep learning curve and so on. So you need that stability. And it would then give rise to observance of the rule of law. Because, if you have impunity and disregard to the Constitution and the law, then, we mustn't expect taxi drivers to observe the road rules. So that's a sign of anarchy if we allow that. And so it's important to have, a very stable and capable state.
Thank you, sir.
But to come, let's say, just to follow up on this matter that President Mlambo is just discussing now, then let's come back to, I'm terribly sorry to be insisting on this all the time, to remember why we have convened here. You see, this matter about governance has got to be part of the discussion in the national dialogue. That's what is more important rather than our own opinions about this matter. For instance, part of what must be discussed in the national dialogue is the issue of corruption, which affects us at all three spheres of government, national, provincial, and local. What do we as South Africans do about that? That's a question that we need to answer in the course of the dialogue. Because I'm quite certain that one of the things that we probably would find in the course of the dialogue, that people may know who is corrupt, but don't know where to report because they don't trust the state system. You see this thing, for instance, with regard to the police, where in some areas you find that people know who the criminals are, but they don't report to the police because they believe the police go and talk to the criminal to say this one has betrayed you. So I'm saying in the national dialogue we've got to discuss that, to say what is it that we do about this governance in its totality. I'm just giving an example of one point of entry, the corruption issue. I think President De Klerk has dealt with the matter about the activism and the dialogue. Indeed, I'm sure that none of us would want to say, don't act, wait until the outcome of the dialogue. Please act. But this national consensus we're talking about, we need to develop a national consensus about the challenges that the country faces. To say how do we unite the country to defeat poverty? It's a critically important thing that poverty affects too many people, again, as President De Klerk was saying. It's one of the national challenges. What is it that we do together to address this matter? What is it that we do to address inequality? I think that becomes part of this, of the national dialogue. I've forgotten what the third question was.
No,
I'm
don't
sorry.
you worry. I need to actually explain that all the discussions that are going to be held today and what has actually transpired will actually filter into what will be on the website, NFDI websites, everything that is actually being talked about. In that space, I think you'll be allowed also to ask further questions because this is about a dialogue as we're actually talking. So I'm going to be taking just 2 more questions. We're running out of time on this side because I've done this side. Right, okay.
Yeah, one of
Thank you, Program Director. Introducing.
Yes, you introduce yourself and your organization.
I'm Glorious Robin. If this dialogue happened in 2014, my main thing there would have been big business. Where are they in helping us with taking the country forward? Basishiya nalento sodwa ngoku and kaloku inzima nakuthi. But so that question, I would still like it to be on board, that big business must help us with fixing the old history which they were a part of. I'm talking institutions, not people, that we are trying to fix still with business in it. I think they can help us fast track a whole lot of things. So that question, I would still like it to remain that. They must be part of the dialogue.
Thank you.
Today, though, I have a different problem. People who have gone to school are useful in a dialogue and also in politics. And so the question there is, how do you integrate the intellectuals back to politics now? Because they are dislodged from that space, because the country belongs to everybody who, what is the word? To all who belong to it,
yes,
who live in it. And in that sentence, there is intellectuals who they are also just as useful in having a political conversation in a manner that says that you can have these sustained conclusions that are required. The last point, I don't know if it's questions or not. We have to go home and tell our parents that there's remorse now. In a manner, though, that they don't lose respect for politicians, for government, because we won't be able to rescue that at the same time, but we need to tell them the truth. And kuna crisis, and that is why there's poverty. Kalok bebe utenga this bag of maize, they were buying it 3 years ago for 70 rands. Now they are paying 250 rands today.
Thank you so much.
That is what the economic crisis means to them.
Sure. We're taking just one more question. People are getting edgy with time.
Amandla. Okhuluma uJoseph Matundu, President waka AMCO. Question endifuna ukuyitsho apha imfitshane. How can we guard against this dialogue initiative only to protect the gains of Captain Park, not looking at the current situation, and also not to reduce this dialogue initiative into a discussion, but to negotiate all the barriers of economic transformation, because I do believe that we're in our slumber. For an example, the 2012 Marikana massacre, where the democratic state massacred 34 mine workers for economic transformation. Everyone was quiet except the individual as the citizens that were making noise. The foundation or institution were quiet about it. So then are we not just reactive because this current situation threatens our comfort zone? Thank you.
I know that there are other questions. I will permit the eminent persons to answer the questions. If people have further questions, as I pointed it out, we are going to have group sessions after lunch where we are going to discuss everything and other things that we have actually not mentioned up till this point. And all of that will be captured and put on our website after the event. I'm going to allow the eminent persons to answer. I don't know who's going to start first.
No, the foundations, indeed, the point that is raised by the President of AMCU is important. Indeed, we want the national dialogue to deal with current affairs, not to run away from anything. The challenge of the transformation of the economy so that it addresses these issues of poverty, inequality, and so on. This must be part of our agenda. So there's nothing that is off the agenda. As a nation, we must say, where were we yesterday? Where are we today with regard to everything? And what must we do? So absolutely, there wouldn't be any, from the side of the foundation, any attempt to say there's anything that is excluded from the national dialogue. In particular, our current reality, including in the manner in which it expresses itself.
Thank you, sir.
The earlier comments were obviously correct. I think what Gloria was saying about we should try and ensure that big business becomes part of the national dialogue. Because even they have got questions to answer and maybe some proposals to make. And she was saying that the intelligentsia also needs to be brought into this process, as we must do the older people, when she was saying we must talk to our parents. So that even those various sections must be part of the national dialogue, and I think that we would all agree with that.
Thank you so much.
Can I just say, with regard to, there was a mention of protecting vested interests or something like that. The dialogue, and I think what all three of us have said, is not aimed at protecting specific interests per se. But a question which must be on the agenda is, to what extent must we ensure that there is investor confidence so that we can get the investments which can create the jobs, which can bring the economic growth, which is a prerequisite for alleviating the poverty problem, for alleviating the unemployment problem. Without economic growth, we cannot alleviate that problem. So we must ask ourselves, to what extent, not must we protect anybody, but to what extent must we inspire people to help us create the capacity to really bring about economic transformation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think we have come to the end of our question and answer to the eminent persons at the moment. I just need to correct something. You know, when you stand on the podium, you listen to everyone until you no longer hear what you're saying. The people who are given an opportunity to speak, some of them were just acknowledging their presence. They don't have to give the statements if they don't need to, but I think it was important for us to acknowledge their presence in this group. When we move from here, we are going to have tea, where we are going to just have a few nibbles. I'm not quite sure we're going to be given as much time as we have on the timetable, but we'll actually just notify people when it is time to come back. And I know those who need to see Asanda Makaka, some of them have already started going to it. I thank you very much.